I'm 28 years old and I spent 7 years building up to this exact moment. Yeah, you read that right. 7 years. Because what happened on Christmas morning wasn't some spontaneous family meltdown. It was the culmination of a lifetime of being treated like the family's punchline. And honestly, I'd been waiting for them to push me far enough that I could finally do what I'd been planning. Let me back up. I'm the youngest of three kids. There's my sister Helena. She's 35. Married to this guy Nigel who works in some corporate job that apparently makes him think he's better than everyone. They have a daughter, my niece Priscilla, who's 8 and has been trained to parrot whatever garbage her parents say. Then there's my brother Xavier. He's 32, never been married, still living with our parents at their house because apparently he's saving money, even though he makes decent income. Me? I moved out at 21, been on my own ever since, working my way up in logistics coordination. Nothing fancy, but I pay my own bills and I've been quietly building something they know nothing about. Growing up, I was always the accident kid. Mom literally told me when I was 13 that I wasn't planned, not in some gentle, loving way either. We were arguing about something stupid and she just said it. You weren't planned. We were done after Xavier. I asked what that meant and she told me her birth control failed. Just flat out. Dad laughed. Helena and Xavier were in the room, and they laughed too. That was the first time I really understood my place in this family. After that, it became the running joke, the mistake, the oops baby, the one who shouldn't have happened. They'd bring it up at holidays, at family dinners, whenever they wanted to put me in my place. I learned pretty early that nothing I did would ever be good enough because, in their eyes, I was fundamentally a problem that kept existing. I tried for years to win them over. I really did. I got good grades in school, not that anyone cared. I helped around the house constantly. I learned to cook because Mom would complain about having to feed an extra mouth. So I started making my own meals at like 14. I bought my own school supplies with money from a part-time job I got at 16. I basically raised myself while living under their roof, and they still found ways to make me feel like I was the burden. When I turned 18, I got a job at a shipping warehouse. It was hard work, physical, long hours, but it was mine. I was saving up to move out. Dad made comments about how I was wasting my time with manual labor, how I'd never amount to anything doing grunt work. Helena said I was being dramatic by getting a job instead of going to college like she did. Xavier just ignored me most of the time unless he needed someone to feel superior to. I moved out 3 days after my 21st birthday. I'd been planning it for months, had an apartment lined up, had been slowly moving my stuff out in my car over several weeks so they wouldn't notice. The day I left, I just took the last of my things and texted them that I was gone. Mom called me ungrateful. Dad said I'd come crawling back within a month. Helena told me I was being childish and throwing a tantrum. Xavier didn't even respond. I didn't crawl back. I worked my butt off at that warehouse, got promoted to shift supervisor within a year, then moved into logistics coordination. I was good at it. I was really good at it. I understood supply chains, I understood routing, I understood how to make things run efficiently. By the time I was 24, I was making more than Xavier, and I hadn't spent a dime on college. But here's the thing, and this is important. I didn't do any of this to prove them wrong or win their approval. I did it because I knew that one day, someday, they were going to need something from me, and I was going to make sure I was in a position to say no, to make them feel exactly how they made me feel my entire life. I kept minimal contact with them over those 7 years. I'd show up for major holidays because, if I didn't, they'd somehow make me the bad guy to extended family. But I never stayed long, never engaged much. I brought appropriate gifts. I smiled, I left, and the whole time they kept treating me the same way they always had. This past year, things started shifting. Mom's been having health issues, nothing life-threatening, but enough that she's been complaining about it constantly. Dad's been talking about retirement, but apparently their savings aren't what they thought they'd be. Helena and Nigel have been stressed about Priscilla's private school tuition. Xavier's been between jobs for 6 months. And Grandpa, Dad's father, he's 81 now, and starting to need more help. I knew all this because family gossip travels, even when you're barely participating. And I knew that eventually they'd start looking at me as a resource instead of a joke. Because that's what families like this do. They tear you down your whole life and then suddenly remember you exist when they need something. So Christmas. I actually put effort into gifts this year. Real effort. I spent weeks on them. For Dad, I made a photo album, and I'm talking a nice one. Leather-bound, filled with pictures I'd collected over the years. Family photos, pictures of him with his parents, his siblings, his kids when we were young. I wrote captions. I organized it chronologically. I made it personal. For Mom, I put together a scrapbook of family recipes. I'd been collecting them for months, some from her mother before she passed, some from her sisters, handwritten recipe cards, the whole thing. For Helena, I made a scrapbook of Priscilla's childhood, stuff I'd gathered from social media, school events I'd quietly attended, birthday parties I'd been invited to and actually showed up for. For Xavier, I got him a collection of vintage records he'd mentioned wanting years ago. For Priscilla, I made her a personalized storybook where she was the hero. For Grandpa, I framed some letters he'd written to Grandma before she died, stuff I'd found in old boxes at their house years ago. I thought maybe this year would be different. Not because I wanted their approval anymore, but because I wanted to see if they were capable of basic human decency. Spoiler alert, they weren't. Christmas morning, we're all at Mom and Dad's house. It's like 9 a.m., everyone's in the living room. There's coffee and pastries that I brought because I knew Mom wouldn't have bothered. We're doing the present exchange, and I'm watching everyone open their gifts from each other first. Helena got Mom some generic candle set. Xavier got Dad a book he'll never read. Priscilla got gifts from everyone because she's the golden grandchild. Standard stuff. Then they get to my gifts. Dad opens his first. He's flipping through the photo album, and I'm watching his face, waiting for literally any reaction that isn't contempt. He gets about halfway through, closes it, looks right at me and says, "A photo album? From the son who wasn't even wanted?" The room went quiet for exactly 2 seconds before Mom started laughing. She opened her gift, the recipe scrapbook, and she's looking at it like I handed her trash. She says, "I was on birth control. You were the mistake that kept growing." Helena opened hers next, the scrapbook I made of Priscilla. She held it up and said, "He made me a scrapbook. This is why he has no career. This is why he wastes his time on arts and crafts instead of doing something real with his life." Xavier didn't even open his gift properly. He just pushed it aside and said, "I don't want anything his greasy hands touched." Just said it like it was the most normal thing in the world. Then Priscilla, this 8-year-old kid who's been taught to be cruel by her parents, asked loudly, "Mommy, why does Uncle smell like sadness?" They all howled, like it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. Mom was practically crying, laughing. Dad was slapping his knee. Helena was hugging Priscilla like she'd just said something adorable instead of something deliberately mean. Xavier was grinning like this was exactly the entertainment he'd hoped for. Dad continued. He said, "We only invite you so the neighbors don't think we abandoned you. We have to maintain appearances. Can't have people asking why our youngest never comes around." Mom added, "Though we probably should have. Should have just let you figure it out on your own from the start." Grandpa, who'd been quiet this whole time, muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. "Waste of good oxygen, that one." I sat there for probably 30 seconds. Just sat there while they laughed, while they enjoyed themselves, while they proved once again that I was nothing to them, that I never had been, that I never would be. And then I stood up, grabbed my coat, left every single gift I'd brought sitting there, walked out the door, got in my car, drove away. I didn't say a word, didn't yell, didn't cry, didn't give them anything. I went home to my apartment, the one I've been living in for 7 years, the one they've never visited. I made myself breakfast. I watched TV. I enjoyed the quiet. Around 6 a.m. the next morning, December 26th, I woke up to someone banging on my apartment door. I ignored it. The banging continued. Then I heard voices, multiple voices, shouting. I looked through the peephole and there they were. All of them. Mom, Dad, Helena, Nigel, Xavier, even Grandpa. Standing in the hallway outside my apartment in the cold. Mom and Helena were barefoot. Dad was in slippers. They were all in pajamas and robes. It was maybe 20 degrees outside and the building's hallway isn't heated that well. They were screaming, "Come back. We'll spend our whole lives making this right. Please don't end it like this." Mom was crying. Dad was pounding on the door. Helena was yelling about how they didn't mean it, how it was just family joking around, how I was being too sensitive. I stood there watching through the peephole, watching them panic, watching them realize that maybe, just maybe, they'd finally pushed too far. And I knew exactly why they were here. It wasn't because they suddenly loved me. It wasn't because they realized they'd been horrible. It was because they needed something. Because their perfect family structure was crumbling, and they just figured out that I was the one person who might have been able to help hold it together. See, here's what they don't know. Over the past 7 years, I've been doing more than just working my way up in logistics. I've been investing. I've been saving. I've been building. I own my apartment outright. I have savings that would make their eyes water. I have connections in industries they need. I have resources they're going to desperately want access to very soon. Dad's planning to retire, but their retirement account took hits they haven't recovered from. Mom's medical bills are piling up and insurance isn't covering everything. Helena and Nigel are drowning in debt from trying to keep up appearances and Priscilla's school costs. Xavier's been unemployed for months and his savings are gone. Grandpa needs care they can't afford. And yesterday morning, before the Christmas gathering, I'd received 3 separate messages. One from Helena asking if I knew anyone hiring in Nigel's field because he might be losing his job. One from Dad asking if I had recommendations for financial advisors because they were worried about their savings. One from Mom asking if I knew anything about supplemental insurance plans. They were starting to circle, starting to realize they might need me. And then they went and did what they always do. They reminded me exactly what they think of me. They couldn't help themselves. They had to get their digs in, had to make sure I knew my place. Except this time, I wasn't 13. I wasn't 18. I wasn't the kid who needed their approval or their roof over my head. I was the one with resources. I was the one with stability. I was the one they were going to need. And I just walked away. So now they're in my hallway, barefoot in the freezing cold, screaming apologies they don't mean, making promises they won't keep, because they've realized what they've done. They've realized they just burned the one bridge they were going to need to cross. I'm still standing at my door, watching through the peephole. My phone's been buzzing non-stop. Messages from all of them. Voicemails, texts saying, they love me. They're sorry. They want to make it right. Please just talk to them. Please just open the door. And I'm thinking about 7 years. 7 years of building myself up. 7 years of waiting for this exact moment. 7 years of knowing that eventually they'd show their hand and I'd be holding all the cards. I haven't opened the door. I'm not going to. Not today anyway. Maybe not ever. Because the thing is, they're not sorry they hurt me. They're sorry they might have consequences for hurting me. There's a difference. A big one. My building's security is probably going to kick them out soon. They can't just camp in the hallway forever. And when they leave, when they go back to their houses and their problems and their financial stress and their need for help, they're going to remember this. They're going to remember that they had a chance to treat me like a human being, and they chose cruelty instead. They chose to make jokes. They chose to remind me I was unwanted. Well, now they're the ones who are unwanted. Now they're the ones standing in the cold. Now they're the ones desperate and scared and realizing they made a massive mistake. And honestly, after 28 years of being the family joke, the unwanted kid, the waste of oxygen, this feels pretty good. This feels like I've been waiting my entire life for this moment, and now that it's here, I'm going to savor every second of it. I know some of you are going to tell me to forgive them, to give them another chance, to remember their family. But here's the thing. They had 28 years to remember I was family. They had 28 years to treat me with basic respect. They had countless chances to be decent human beings, and they blew every single one. So no, I'm not opening the door. I'm not answering the phone. I'm not giving them the satisfaction of thinking their desperate apologies worked. Because this isn't about forgiveness. This is about consequences. This is about them finally understanding that actions have repercussions. That you can't treat people like garbage for decades and then expect them to save you when you need help. They're still out there screaming. Security just showed up. I can hear them trying to explain why they're here in their pajamas, barefoot, making a scene. This is going to be a fun conversation for them. And me? I'm going to make another cup of coffee. I'm going to sit on my couch. And I'm going to start planning what comes next. Because this is just the beginning. Update 1. Holy hell, the response to my last post was insane. Thanks for all the support and, yeah, to the commenter who said, this sounds like I've been waiting for this moment my whole life, you're absolutely right. I have been. But buckle up because the last 48 hours have been absolutely wild, and I'm learning exactly how deep their desperation goes. So, after security kicked them out of my building on the 26th, I thought maybe they'd get the hint. Maybe they'd realize I was serious about being done. Nope. Instead, things escalated in ways I didn't even anticipate. That same day, around noon, my phone started going absolutely crazy. Not just texts and calls from my immediate family, but extended family too. Aunts, uncles, cousins I haven't spoken to in years. All of them saying basically the same thing. That I was being cruel. That family is family. That mom is devastated. That dad's heart can't take this stress. That I need to forgive and forget because it's the holidays. That Helena's crying constantly. That Xavier is worried sick. That Priscilla doesn't understand why Uncle hates her now. And here's the thing that really got me. Every single message had the same energy. Like they'd been fed a script. Like my family had gone to everyone we know and spun some story about how I'd abandoned them over a harmless joke. How I was being dramatic and sensitive. How they were just kidding around like they always do, and I suddenly snapped for no reason. I didn't respond to any of them. Not one. Because what's the point? These people weren't there. They don't know what it's been like for 28 years. They don't know about the thousands of little cuts that led to this moment. They're just hearing whatever sob story my parents told them. But then, on the 27th, things got interesting. I got a Facebook message from my Aunt Carolyn, Dad's sister. Now, Carolyn and I were actually pretty close when I was a kid. She lived a few states away, so I didn't see her much, but when I did, she was always kind to me, always treated me like I mattered. She moved even further away when I was about 15 and we lost touch. But I always remembered her as one of the only adults in my family who seemed to actually like me. Her message wasn't like the others. She said she'd heard about what happened and that my mom had called her crying, asking her to reach out to me. But then she said something that made me pause. She said that she wanted to hear my side because she knows how my parents can be. She knows how they treated me growing up because she saw it firsthand, and it always bothered her. She said she'd tried to say something about it years ago and they'd basically cut her off for interfering. I sat with that message for a few hours before I responded. Finally, I wrote back and just laid it all out. Everything. The decades of being called a mistake. The constant mockery. The way they treated me like a burden my entire childhood. What they said to me on Christmas morning. All of it. She responded within an hour, and she was furious. Not at me. At them. She told me that she'd suspected it was something like this because my mom's version of events made no sense. According to Mom, they'd all given me lovely gifts and been kind and welcoming, and I just randomly decided to storm out and cut them off because I was going through some kind of mental health crisis. Carolyn said she knew that was garbage because she's seen how they operate. Then she told me something I didn't know. Apparently, back when I was around 10, she'd confronted my parents about how they treated me. She'd noticed during a visit that they constantly dismissed me, made jokes at my expense, treated me differently than Helena and Xavier. She'd pulled my dad aside and told him it wasn't right, that I was just a kid, and I didn't deserve to be made to feel unwanted. My dad apparently told her to mind her own business, that they were parenting the way they saw fit, that I needed to be toughened up because I was too soft, that the real world wasn't going to coddle me, so they weren't going to either. Carolyn pushed back and said, there's a difference between preparing a kid for the real world and being cruel to them. My mom got involved and basically told Carolyn that if she didn't like how they raised their kids, she could stay away. So she did. She stopped visiting as much, moved further away, kept her distance because she couldn't stand watching it anymore, and they'd made it clear her input wasn't welcome. Learning this absolutely validated everything I'd been feeling my entire life. Someone else saw it. Someone else recognized it wasn't normal. Someone else tried to intervene and got shut down. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't too sensitive. It was real. Carolyn told me she supported whatever decision I made about my family, and that if I needed anything, I could reach out to her. She also said that she was going to call my dad and tell him exactly what she thought of how they ambushed me at my apartment. I told her she didn't have to do that, but she said she wanted to, that she'd stayed quiet for too long. Meanwhile, the messages from my parents and siblings kept coming, but now they were changing tone. On the 28th, Dad sent me a long text about how they were just joking around, how I used to be able to take a joke, how they didn't understand why I was being so dramatic about this. He said that families tease each other, and that's normal, that I was overreacting to some harmless fun. Helena sent me a message saying that I was punishing Priscilla by staying away, that Priscilla loved me and didn't understand what she'd done wrong, that I was being selfish by making an 8-year-old feel bad because I couldn't handle some family banter. She said that Priscilla had been asking where I was and crying because she thought I hated her. Xavier's message was different. He basically said that I was making things difficult for everyone by being stubborn, that Mom and Dad were getting older and didn't need this stress, that I should think about what my absence was doing to the family as a whole, that we needed to present a united front because that's what families do. Mom's messages were all about how hurt she was, how she didn't raise me to be cruel, how she'd sacrificed so much for me over the years, how after everything she'd done for me, this is how I repay her, how I was breaking her heart by cutting them off over nothing. Not one of them actually apologized for what they said. Not one of them acknowledged that maybe, just maybe, calling me unwanted and a mistake and a waste of oxygen on Christmas morning was messed up. It was all about how I was the problem for reacting to it. I still didn't respond, and I could tell from the messages that it was driving them insane. They kept sending follow-ups, asking if I was getting their texts, asking if my phone was broken, asking if I was okay, getting more and more frantic as the silence continued. Then, on December 29th, something shifted. I got a text from Helena that was different from the others. She said that Nigel's job situation was worse than they'd thought, that they'd been counting on his year-end bonus to cover some major expenses, and it wasn't coming through. That they were in a tight spot financially, and she was wondering if I might be able to loan them some money just to get through the next few months until things stabilized. There it was. The real reason for the panic. The real reason they were so desperate to get me back in the fold. They needed money, they needed help, and they'd just realized they'd torched their relationship with the one family member who might have been in a position to provide it. Because here's what they didn't know, but were apparently starting to figure out. I've been living below my means for 7 years. Way below. I drive a paid-off 2015 Toyota. I live in a modest one-bedroom apartment that I own. I don't take expensive vacations. I don't buy designer anything. I pack my lunch for work. I cook at home. To them, this probably looked like I was scraping by, barely making it. Nothing special. But the reality is, I make good money. Really good money for someone my age, without a college degree. And I've been saving and investing aggressively since I was 21. I have a solid 6-figure investment portfolio. I have an emergency fund that could cover a year of expenses. I have retirement accounts that are way ahead of where they should be for my age. I own property. I have zero debt. I didn't do this to show off or prove anything to them. I did this because I learned early that I couldn't count on them for anything, that I needed to be completely self-sufficient, that I needed to build security for myself because they sure weren't going to provide it. And now, they were starting to connect the dots. Dad's retirement account is apparently in trouble. Mom's medical expenses are piling up. Helena and Nigel are drowning in debt. Xavier's been unemployed for 6 months. Grandpa needs care they can't afford. And they'd been planning to start leaning on me for help because families help each other, right? Except I wasn't answering. I wasn't engaging. I'd walked away. And they were beginning to realize that all their cruelty, all their jokes, all their decades of treating me like I didn't matter had consequences they hadn't anticipated. Helena's text asking for money was followed by another one an hour later saying, "Never mind." Forget she asked. She didn't mean to put pressure on me. But it was too late. I'd seen it. I knew exactly what this was about now. That evening, Mom called. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail and I listened to it later. She was crying, saying that she didn't understand why I was doing this to them. That they loved me. That they'd always loved me. That yes, they joked around, but that's just how their family was. That I'd always been too sensitive. That she was sorry if I felt hurt, but they never meant anything by it. That she needed me to come back because the family wasn't complete without me. Notice the language. Sorry if I felt hurt. Not sorry for hurting me. Sorry if. Like my hurt was a perception problem, not a result of their actions. I saved that voicemail. Saved all the messages. Because I'm keeping a record of exactly how this plays out. On the 30th, Dad tried a different approach. He sent a text saying that he wanted to meet up to talk. Just the two of us, father and son. He said we could go get lunch somewhere and discuss everything like adults. He said that he understood I was upset and he wanted to hear me out. That he was willing to listen. I almost laughed. Willing to listen. After 28 years of not listening, he was suddenly willing to listen. And I knew exactly why. Because he needed something. Because their financial house of cards was starting to collapse and they'd realized I was potentially their safety net. I didn't respond to that either. And his follow-up text 2 hours later confirmed everything. He said that he knew things had been tight for everyone lately, that the economy had been hard on the whole family, that we needed to stick together during tough times, that family takes care of family, that he was sure we could work through whatever issues I had if we just sat down and talked. Translation: we need your money, and we'll pretend to care about your feelings if that's what it takes to get it. Xavier sent a message saying that I was being immature by ghosting everyone, that adults communicate, that adults work through their problems instead of running away, that I was acting like a child instead of a grown man. Rich, coming from the 32-year-old still living with his parents. Priscilla apparently tried to video call me through Helena's phone. I didn't answer, but Helena sent a follow-up text saying that Priscilla just wanted to talk to me, that she missed me, that I was making a little girl cry by ignoring her. More emotional manipulation. And through all of this, through every message and voicemail and attempt to get me to respond, not once did any of them actually take responsibility for what they said. Not once did they acknowledge that their treatment of me over the years was wrong. It was all deflection, all excuses, all attempts to make me the bad guy for having boundaries. The thing is, I've been preparing for this for 7 years. I knew this day would come eventually. I knew that their cruelty would eventually catch up with them. I knew that they'd eventually need something from me and realized too late that they'd burned that bridge. I just didn't expect it to happen this fast. I thought it might take months or even years for their financial situations to get desperate enough. But apparently things are worse than I realized. Apparently they're in deeper trouble than they let on. And apparently, I was supposed to be their bailout plan. Well, too bad. Because I'm not bailing out people who've spent my entire life making me feel worthless. I'm not rescuing people who called me a mistake on Christmas morning. I'm not helping people who had to be dragged into treating me with basic human decency, and even then couldn't manage it. Some of you commented on my last post saying I should hear them out, that people can change, that family is important. But here's what you need to understand. They're not sorry they hurt me. They're sorry they need me. There's a massive difference. If their finances were solid, if they didn't need help, they wouldn't be blowing up my phone right now. They'd have moved on already. They'd be laughing about sensitive little brother who can't take a joke. But they do need help, and I'm not giving it. And every day that passes where I don't respond, they get more desperate, more frantic, more willing to say whatever they think I want to hear. And honestly, I'm kind of enjoying watching it unfold. Is that petty? Maybe. But after 28 years of being the family punching bag, watching them squirm feels pretty satisfying. Carolyn called me yesterday. We talked for over an hour. She told me more stories about my childhood that I'd either forgotten or blocked out. Times when she visited and saw how they treated me. Times when she tried to intervene and got shut down. She said she'd always felt guilty for not pushing harder, for not staying more involved. I told her it wasn't her responsibility to fix my family. She asked what I was planning to do. I told her the truth. I was planning to let them stew, to let them realize exactly what they'd lost, to let them face the consequences of decades of cruelty without a safety net. She didn't try to talk me out of it. She just said she understood and that she'd support whatever I decided. It's New Year's Eve tomorrow. I'm planning to spend it alone in my apartment watching movies, eating takeout, enjoying the peace. They'll probably try to use the holiday as another opportunity to guilt me. Another round of messages about family and togetherness and new beginnings. But I'm done. I'm completely done. And the best part? They still don't fully understand why I'm done. They still think this is about Christmas morning. They still think if they apologize for that one incident, everything will go back to normal. They don't get that Christmas morning was just the final straw, that it was 28 years in the making, that every joke, every dismissal, every reminder that I was unwanted added up to this moment, that you can't treat someone like garbage for their entire life and then expect them to forget it all because you suddenly need something. So yeah, I'm not responding. I'm not meeting up. I'm not giving them money. I'm not giving them anything. And judging by the increasingly desperate tone of their messages, they're starting to realize that. Let's see how desperate they get. Update 2. Okay, so apparently my family has completely lost whatever remaining sense they had. The comments on my last update asking if they'd try to ambush me somewhere public were unfortunately prophetic. Yes, to that one commenter who said they'd probably show up at my workplace, you called it. You absolutely called it. January 2nd. I went back to work after the holiday break. I work in a logistics coordination office. It's a pretty professional environment. Business casual dress code, clients coming in and out, the whole deal. I've been there for 4 years, worked my way up from the warehouse. Everyone knows me, respects me. I have a good reputation there. Around 11 a.m., I was in a meeting with my supervisor and 2 clients discussing a shipping route optimization project. We're in the conference room, going through spreadsheets and timelines. Very normal work stuff. My phone was on silent in my pocket because obviously I'm not going to be checking it during a client meeting. The meeting wrapped up around 11:45 and I walked the clients back to the lobby. And there they were, Mom, Dad, and Helena, just sitting in our lobby like they had every right to be there. Mom looked like she'd been crying. Dad looked angry. Helena looked uncomfortable but determined. I froze. Literally just stopped walking. The clients noticed something was wrong and asked if I was okay. I said yes, just surprised to see some family members, and excused myself. The clients left and I walked over to where my parents and sister were sitting. I asked them what they were doing here. Dad stood up and said they needed to talk to me, and since I wasn't answering my phone, they didn't have a choice but to come find me. Mom immediately started in about how worried they'd been, how they hadn't heard from me in over a week, how they didn't know if I was okay, how they just needed to see me. Helena chimed in saying that I was being unreasonable by ignoring them, and they needed to sort this out as a family. She said that what happened on Christmas was unfortunate, but that I was blowing it out of proportion, and we needed to move past it. I looked at all 3 of them and told them this was my workplace, that they couldn't just show up at my job, that this was completely inappropriate. Dad said that if I just answered my phone or agreed to meet with them, they wouldn't have had to come here. Like it was my fault they were disrupting my professional environment. Our receptionist was watching this whole thing unfold. My supervisor had walked into the lobby to check on something and stopped when she saw what was happening. Other coworkers were definitely noticing. This was turning into a scene, and I could feel my professional reputation crumbling in real time. I told them we needed to take this outside. Mom said, no, we could talk right here. What was the problem? We were family. I repeated that we were taking this outside and started walking toward the door. They followed me, and we ended up in the parking lot. Once we were outside, Dad launched into this whole speech about how I was tearing the family apart, about how they'd raised me better than this, about how I was being selfish and childish and punishing everyone for a misunderstanding. He said that families joke with each other, and I'd always been too sensitive, but this was getting ridiculous. Mom was crying, saying that she couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't function because I'd cut them off, that she was my mother, and she deserved better than being ghosted by her own son, that after everything she'd sacrificed for me, after carrying me for 9 months even though I wasn't planned, after raising me and feeding me and clothing me, this is how I repaid her. And there it was again. Even while trying to get me to talk to them, she couldn't help but mention that I wasn't planned, couldn't help but remind me that I was the burden she'd chosen to keep. It was so automatic for her she didn't even realize she was doing it. Helena was going on about Priscilla, about how I was hurting an innocent child, about how Priscilla cried herself to sleep asking why Uncle didn't love her anymore, about how I was being cruel to a little girl who'd done nothing wrong. I pointed out that Priscilla had asked why I smelled like sadness on Christmas morning, and Helena immediately said that Priscilla was 8. That kids say things, that I couldn't hold a child's innocent question against her. Innocent question. Like Priscilla hadn't been coached her entire life to view me as lesser. Like that comment just came out of nowhere and wasn't a reflection of everything she'd heard her parents say about me. I told them they needed to leave. Dad said we weren't done talking. I said yes we were, because I had to get back to work and they'd already embarrassed me enough by showing up here. Helena said that if I cared more about what my coworkers thought than my own family, that proved how messed up my priorities were. Mom grabbed my arm and said, please, just please listen. They were sorry. They didn't mean to hurt me. They just wanted their son back. I pulled my arm away and told her that I wasn't her son in any way that mattered, that she'd made it clear my entire life that I was an accident, a mistake, something that happened to her rather than something she chose, that she didn't get to play the devoted mother card now. She looked genuinely shocked, like she couldn't believe I was saying this. Like in her mind, despite everything, she'd been a good mother and I was the one rewriting history. Dad told me I was being disrespectful and I needed to watch my tone. I laughed. Actually, laughed. Because here we were, with them disrupting my workplace and demanding my attention, and I was the disrespectful one. I told them I wanted them to leave and not contact me again. Dad said that wasn't going to happen, that I was their son whether I liked it or not, that family doesn't just give up on each other. I said that's funny because they'd given up on treating me like family a long time ago. They just didn't realize I'd notice. Then Helena dropped the real reason they were there. She said that they were going through some financial difficulties and they needed to know if the family could count on me, that families support each other in hard times, that they weren't asking for much, just some help to get through a rough patch, that surely I could understand that. I asked her point blank how much they wanted. She stammered and said they weren't asking for money. Not exactly, just wondering if I might be willing to help in whatever way I could. Dad cut in and said that wasn't why they were here. They just wanted to reconcile. The money thing was separate. But it wasn't separate. That's exactly why they were there. That's why they'd been so frantic about me not responding. That's why they showed up at my workplace. Because their finances were falling apart and I was supposed to be their safety net. I told them I wasn't giving them money. Helena's face went red, and she said she wasn't asking for money. How dare I make it about that? I said she literally just brought it up. She backtracked and said she was just mentioning that times were hard for everyone, that she wasn't asking for anything specific. Mom said that if I had the means to help my family and I chose not to out of spite, then I wasn't the person she raised me to be. I told her she didn't raise me to be anything. I raised myself while living in her house. She gasped like I'd slapped her. Dad's face was getting that angry color it gets when he's losing control of a situation. He said I had 1 week to come to my senses and reach out to them, that after 1 week, they were done trying, that if I wanted to throw away my family over hurt feelings, that was my choice, but I'd regret it. I said, okay, 1 week. Don't contact me during that week, and after that week, don't contact me ever again. Consider this me making my choice right now. Helena started yelling about how I was making a huge mistake, how I'd end up alone and miserable, how I'd realize too late what I'd thrown away. Mom was full-on sobbing now. Dad was glaring at me like he wanted to hit me but knew he couldn't because we were in a public parking lot outside my workplace where people could see. I turned around and walked back inside. They didn't follow. I went straight to the bathroom and locked myself in a stall for about 10 minutes, just trying to calm down. When I came out, my supervisor was waiting outside the bathroom. She asked if everything was okay, if those people were gone, if I needed anything. I apologized for the disruption. She said it was fine but asked if I was safe, if there was anything the company needed to be aware of. I told her it was a family issue and it was handled. She looked skeptical but said okay, and if they showed up again to let security know immediately. I spent the rest of the day trying to act normal while internally replaying the parking lot confrontation over and over. Multiple coworkers asked if I was all right. Word had spread that I'd had some kind of family emergency in the lobby. I kept saying everything was fine and trying to redirect to work topics. By the time I got home that evening, I had 47 text messages. From Mom, Dad, Helena, Xavier, who apparently heard what happened. Even Grandpa sent a message saying I was disgracing the family name. They were all variations of the same thing. How dare I speak to my mother that way? How dare I refuse to help family? How dare I be so cold and heartless? How dare I prioritize money over family bonds? Except I wasn't prioritizing money over family. They were. They were the ones who came to my workplace to ask for financial help. They were the ones whose entire panic over me cutting them off was rooted in needing access to my resources. I was just refusing to be used. Xavier's message was particularly rich. He said that Mom called him crying, that I'd said horrible things to her, that I'd told her she wasn't really my mother. He said that was crossing a line and I owed her an apology. That whatever issues I had with how they joked around, attacking Mom like that was unacceptable. I didn't respond to any of them. Not a single message. January 3rd, I got a message from Carolyn. Apparently, Mom had called her too, spinning the story to make me sound completely unhinged. According to Mom's version, they'd gone to gently check on me at work because they were worried about my mental health. And I'd screamed at them in the parking lot, called Mom terrible names, and threatened them. None of that happened. But that was the story making the rounds through the extended family. Carolyn said she didn't believe Mom's version and asked what actually happened. I told her everything, word for word as much as I could remember. She wasn't surprised. She said it sounded exactly like something they'd do, show up somewhere I couldn't avoid them and then play victim when I didn't react the way they wanted. She also told me something interesting. Apparently, Dad had called her a few days ago asking if she'd be willing to co-sign a loan for them. She'd said no. He'd gotten angry and accused her of abandoning family. She'd told him that she'd help family members who treated each other with respect, and since he'd never shown her nephew any respect, he could figure out his financial problems on his own. So they'd already been trying to get money from extended family. They'd been shopping around for someone to bail them out, and everyone was apparently saying no, which meant I was likely their last option, which explained the desperation. January 4th, Helena sent me a long message. She said she'd talked to Nigel and they'd decided to be completely honest with me. Their financial situation was worse than she'd let on. Nigel had lost his job back in November. They'd been living off savings and credit cards since then. They were 2 months behind on their mortgage. Priscilla's school tuition was due, and they didn't have it. They'd been counting on family help to get through this rough period until Nigel found new employment. She said that she knew we'd had our differences, but surely I could put that aside to help my niece. That Priscilla shouldn't suffer because the adults in her life had disagreements. That if I couldn't help them for Helena and Nigel's sake, couldn't I help for Priscilla? And there it was, using an 8-year-old as emotional leverage. The same 8-year-old they taught to mock me. The same 8-year-old who'd asked why I smelled like sadness while her parents laughed. I finally responded to that one. I told Helena that Priscilla's financial security was her and Nigel's responsibility, not mine. That if they were in financial trouble, they needed to make different choices. Downsize their house, pull Priscilla from private school, cut their expenses, find work, figure it out like adults. That I wasn't their bailout plan. Helena wrote back immediately saying I was being cruel. That Priscilla deserved stability. That taking her out of her school would devastate her. That asking them to sell their house was ridiculous. That I clearly had money to spare based on the fact that I owned my apartment, so why wouldn't I help? I told her that I had money because I made different choices than they did. Because I lived below my means. Because I saved instead of spent. Because I planned for emergencies instead of assuming someone would rescue me. That my financial stability was the result of 7 years of discipline, and I wasn't going to hand it over to people who'd never shown me an ounce of respect. She said I was punishing a child for adult problems. I said no. I was declining to enable adults who'd made poor financial decisions and treated me terribly. Big difference. She stopped responding after that. January 5th, Dad sent a message saying their 1-week deadline was almost up. That I had 2 more days to come to my senses. That after that, I was out of the family permanently. Like that was supposed to scare me. Like being out of this family wasn't exactly what I wanted. Mom sent a message saying she was seeing a therapist now because of the stress I was causing her. That her blood pressure was dangerously high. That if something happened to her, it would be on my conscience. More guilt, more manipulation. More attempts to make me responsible for her emotional state. Xavier sent a message saying that he'd found a job finally, that he was starting next week, that things were looking up for him. Then he said that unlike me, he was going to use his income to help the family because that's what good sons do. I didn't respond, but I wanted to point out that he was 32, living with our parents rent-free for 6 months while unemployed, and now he was acting like getting a job made him superior to me. Through all of this, I kept going to work, kept living my life, kept not engaging. And I could tell from the tone of their messages that they were starting to realize I was serious, that I actually meant it when I said I was done, that their deadline threat wasn't going to work because I didn't care if they officially disowned me. Yesterday, January 6th, Carolyn called me. She said she'd gotten a call from Mom begging her to intervene. Mom had apparently told Carolyn that she was terrified I was going to hurt myself because I was acting so irrationally, that she was worried about my mental state, that she needed Carolyn to check on me and convince me to get help. Carolyn had told Mom that I seemed perfectly rational and that maybe the problem wasn't my mental state but their behavior. Mom had hung up on her. Carolyn asked me what my plan was. I told her honestly that I didn't have a detailed plan, I was just not engaging with them anymore. She said that was probably for the best, but to be prepared for them to escalate. That people like this don't just accept boundaries, they push harder when they realize they're losing control. I asked what she thought they'd do. She said she didn't know, but that they were clearly desperate and desperate people do desperate things. She was right. This morning, January 7th, I woke up to discover they'd posted about me on Facebook. Mom had written this long post about how heartbroken she was that her youngest son had cut off the entire family, about how she didn't understand what she'd done wrong, about how she'd tried everything to reach him but he wouldn't respond, about how she was asking for prayers and support during this difficult time. The comments were full of people I barely knew offering sympathy and support to her, telling her she was a wonderful mother, telling her that sometimes kids go through phases, telling her to give me time and I'd come around. A few people even commented that I was being disrespectful and ungrateful. Nobody knew the full story. Nobody knew what they'd said to me. Nobody knew about the decades of being treated like a mistake. They just saw a sad mother posting about her estranged son and assumed I was the problem. I could respond. I could comment on the post with the truth. I could air out all the dirty laundry publicly. But that feels like stooping to their level. That feels like exactly what they want, a public confrontation they can twist to make me look unhinged. So I'm not doing that. I'm just letting it sit there, letting them have their pity party, letting people think whatever they want. Because the people whose opinions I actually care about know the truth. Tomorrow is their 1-week deadline. I'm curious to see if they actually follow through on cutting me off or if that was just another empty threat. Either way, I'm not changing my mind. I'm not backing down. I spent 28 years being their punching bag, and I'm done. They can keep their family. I'll keep my peace, my money, and my self-respect. Final update. It's been 3 weeks since my last update, and holy hell, things have reached a conclusion I didn't fully anticipate. The 1-week deadline came and went, and what happened after has been absolutely wild. For everyone who's been following this saga, here's how it all ended. January 8th, the day after their deadline, I woke up to complete silence. No messages, no calls, no Facebook posts, nothing. I actually checked my phone multiple times to make sure it was working because the sudden absence of harassment was jarring after 2 weeks of constant bombardment. That silence lasted exactly 36 hours. On January 9th around 8 p.m., someone knocked on my apartment door. I looked through the peephole and it was Dad. Just Dad. Alone. No Mom, no Helena, no entourage. He looked tired, older than I remembered. He knocked again and said my name. Said he knew I was home because my car was in the lot. Said he just needed 5 minutes. I opened the door, but didn't invite him in. Stood in the doorway and asked what he wanted. He said he wanted to talk. Just the two of us, man to man. I said we didn't have anything to talk about. He asked if he could at least come inside instead of having this conversation in the hallway. I said no because I didn't trust him in my space and whatever he had to say could be said right there. He actually looked hurt by that, like the idea that I didn't trust him was some shocking revelation. He asked when I'd become so cold. I told him I'd become exactly what he and Mom had spent 28 years teaching me to be. Self-sufficient, untrusting, and unwilling to let people use me. He was quiet for a minute, and then he said that he'd been doing a lot of thinking over the past week, that maybe they had been too hard on me growing up, that maybe the jokes had gone too far sometimes, that maybe he hadn't been the father he should have been. But that was all in the past and we needed to move forward as a family. I asked him why. Why now? Why, after 28 years, was he suddenly interested in being a better father? He stumbled over his words and said that family was important, that life was short, that he didn't want to have regrets. I asked him point blank if this had anything to do with money. His face did this thing where I could tell he was trying to decide whether to lie or be honest. He chose deflection, said that it hurt that I thought so little of him that I'd accuse him of only caring about money, that he was here because he loved me and wanted to fix things. I told him I didn't believe him. He asked why I was being so stubborn, so unwilling to accept an apology when he was standing right there trying to make things right. I said that first of all, he hadn't actually apologized. He'd said maybe they were too hard on me. Maybe the jokes went too far. That's not an apology. That's hedging. That's leaving room to claim later that I misunderstood or overreacted. Second, I said, even if he did apologize, it wouldn't change anything, because this wasn't about one incident or one apology. This was about a lifetime of treatment that taught me I didn't matter to them, that I was a burden, that I was unwanted. You can't undo that with 5 minutes in a hallway. He said I was being unreasonable, that everyone makes mistakes, that parents aren't perfect, that holding grudges was only hurting me in the long run. I told him I wasn't holding a grudge. I was enforcing a boundary. There's a difference. Then he switched tactics. He said that Mom was struggling, that her health was deteriorating from the stress, that Helena and Nigel were about to lose their house, that Xavier was trying to help but his new job didn't pay enough to support everyone, that Grandpa needed care they couldn't afford, that the family was falling apart and I was the only one who could help hold it together. And there it was. The real reason he was there. Not to apologize, not to make amends, but to convince me to be their financial safety net. I asked him how much they needed. He said it wasn't about a specific amount, it was about family supporting family. I repeated the question. How much? He finally said that if I could help with about $30,000, it would get them through the immediate crisis. Helena's mortgage, Mom's medical bills, Grandpa's care for the next few months, just to stabilize things while they figured out long-term solutions. $30,000. They wanted me to hand over $30,000 to fix problems they'd created through their own choices. I actually laughed. Dad asked what was funny. I said that it was funny how I'd gone from being a waste of oxygen to being worth $30,000 in the span of 2 weeks. He said that wasn't fair. I said that what wasn't fair was being treated like garbage my entire life and then being expected to pay for the privilege. He started getting angry, said I was twisting everything, that he was trying to be honest with me about their situation, and I was throwing it back in his face. I told him that I'd worked hard for 7 years to build financial security specifically because I knew I couldn't count on them for anything, that every dollar I had was money I'd earned and saved, while they mocked me for not going to college, for working in a warehouse, for living below my means, that my financial stability was a result of choices they'd ridiculed, and now they wanted access to it. He said that families help each other. I said that families also treat each other with basic respect, and they'd never done that for me. That he didn't get to skip the respect part and jump straight to the help part just because it was convenient for him now. He said I was going to regret this, that one day I'd be old and alone, and I'd realize I'd thrown away my family over pride. I told him I'd rather be old and alone than spend the rest of my life being used by people who never valued me. He stood there for another minute like he was trying to think of something else to say, some other angle to work. Then he just left. I closed the door and sat on my couch for probably an hour just processing what had happened. The amount they wanted was genuinely shocking. $30,000. That wasn't help with groceries or a small loan. That was a massive bailout. And they felt entitled to it because we were family. The next day, January 10th, Helena sent me a message. She said Dad had told her about our conversation, that she was disappointed in me, that she'd thought better of me than to let my niece become homeless because of pride. I told her that if Priscilla became homeless, it would be because of her and Nigel's financial decisions, not because of me. She said I was heartless. Then she said something that finally made everything click into place. She said that they'd always known I'd end up being the successful one financially because I was so obsessed with money and security, that even when we were kids I was always so worried about having enough, always so careful with every dollar, that they joked about it back then but they'd also kind of counted on it. Counted on me being the responsible one who could bail everyone else out when needed. They'd been planning this. Not consciously maybe, but on some level they'd always seen me as the eventual family bank, the responsible younger brother who'd make something of himself out of fear and insecurity, and then they could tap into that when they needed it. My trauma response to their mistreatment had become their retirement plan. I told Helena that was the most messed up thing I'd ever heard, that they'd treated me terribly, recognized that it made me financially anxious and responsible, and then decided to benefit from it. She said I was twisting her words. I said I was just repeating what she'd said. She didn't respond to that. Over the next week, the messages continued, but they changed. They weren't apologetic anymore. They were angry, accusing. Dad sent messages about how selfish I was, how I'd turned my back on family when they needed me most, how he'd raised me better than this. Mom sent messages about how she was heartbroken that her son cared more about money than his own mother's health. Xavier sent a message saying that he was stepping up to help, even though his new job didn't pay much, that he was giving mom and dad money every month, that he was being a real son unlike me. I didn't point out that he'd been living rent-free with them for 6 months, and any money he was giving them now was probably less than what he owed them for that. Helena sent updates about their house situation, about how they were trying to work with the bank, about how Priscilla was scared. Every message was designed to make me feel guilty, to make me feel responsible, to make me crack and give them what they wanted. I didn't crack. I didn't respond. I just let them send their messages into the void. January 18th, Carolyn called me. She said she'd heard from multiple family members that I was refusing to help mom and dad in their time of need, that people were taking sides, that some extended family thought I was being too harsh while others understood my position. She asked how I was holding up. I told her honestly that I was doing fine, that the messages bothered me sometimes, but mostly I just felt relieved. Relieved that I was out. Relieved that I'd finally set a boundary and stuck to it. Relieved that I didn't have to pretend anymore. She said she was proud of me, that it takes strength to walk away from toxic family, that she wished she'd been more involved when I was younger, more insistent about calling out their treatment of me. I told her it wasn't her responsibility, and I appreciated her support now. Then she told me something interesting. Apparently, Dad had called her again asking for money. When she'd said no, he'd gotten angry and said that she was just like me, selfish and uncaring, that the whole family was falling apart because people cared more about money than family bonds. Carolyn had pointed out that he was literally calling to ask for money. So who was actually prioritizing money here? He'd hung up on her. She said she thought they were starting to realize that nobody was going to bail them out, that they'd burned too many bridges and made too many assumptions about people's willingness to help, that they were going to have to actually deal with their problems instead of finding someone to fix it for them. Last week, January 22nd, I got a final message from Mom. It was long and rambling and basically said that she'd done her best as a mother, that she'd made mistakes, but she'd loved all her children, that if I couldn't see that, if I couldn't forgive human imperfection, then maybe I was right and we were better off apart, that she was washing her hands of me, that she'd tried everything and I'd rejected every attempt, that from now on, as far as she was concerned, she had 2 children, not 3. I read it twice and then deleted it, and I felt nothing. No sadness, no anger, no regret, just nothing. Because she was finally saying what we'd both known my entire life, that I didn't really count, that I was optional, that they could just decide I wasn't part of the family anymore and move on. Except this time, I'd already moved on. I'd already grieved the family I'd never had. I'd already accepted that they weren't capable of loving me the way I deserved. Her officially disowning me didn't change anything because I'd already disowned them in every way that mattered. Yesterday, January 28th, Carolyn sent me a text saying she'd heard through the family grapevine that Helena and Nigel had sold their house, that they'd downsized to a rental and pulled Priscilla from private school, that they were bitter about it and blaming me publicly to anyone who'd listen, that Mom's health issues had turned out to be mostly stress and anxiety related, and now that she'd accepted I wasn't coming back, she was actually doing better, that Dad had picked up some part-time consulting work to supplement their retirement income, that Xavier was still living with them but at least paying rent now. In other words, they were surviving, making hard choices, adjusting their lifestyles, figuring it out, exactly like I'd said they should, without my money, without my help, without me. And I'm surviving too. Actually, I'm better than surviving. I'm thriving. My work situation settled down after the parking lot incident. My supervisor pulled me aside last week and said she'd noticed I seemed more relaxed lately, asked if everything was okay with my family situation. I told her it was resolved. She didn't push for details. I've been sleeping better, eating better. I joined a gym. I'm reading more. I'm looking into maybe taking some classes just for fun, not for career advancement, just because I'm interested in learning new things. I'm making plans for the future that don't involve anybody else's expectations or demands. I'm building a life that's actually mine, not a life spent trying to earn approval I'll never get. Not a life spent being the responsible one who fixes everyone else's problems, just a life where I get to decide what matters and what doesn't. Some of you commented on my first post asking if I'd ever forgive them, if I thought I'd regret cutting them off. Honestly, no, I don't think I'll regret this, because the version of family they were offering me wasn't real.